Sure, your schedule's like everybody else's, most of the time out of control, but sure, your schedule's like everybody else's, most of the time out of control, but nice to have you here. Drive up was okay?
Yeah, just a bit of a headwind.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a change in the air up here quite frequently.
Yeah, man.
Worst time.
Hammered, so. I think our objective in inviting you up was to kind of have just an informal discussion about water, ownership, water rights. Obviously, eventually we'd like to talk about what an augmentation plan is, what it does, what it can do, what it can't do, so on and so forth. I'm sure you're familiar with their proposed area, Upper Arks, their blue line. Here on this map, it's a red line, but so if any of us have any questions, we'd like to just be able to.
How long do we want to talk?
Till 4 at the latest.
Yeah, I had just,
I saw the hours on the door.
yeah,
Doesn't have to be that long.
we have to
It's up
post,
to you.
post our stuff. I'd say probably hour and a half, whatever.
Okay.
I guess I would
Where'd you
ask
come
you that. How
from?
long
You gotta
do
drive
I live in
over.
Pueblo.
Well,
Yeah.
I don't, certainly no longer than 2, but it's up to your schedule. and-
Well, okay, I just want to know how much detail to
Yeah.
plow into or
Okay.
not plow into.
If you get in over our heads, can we say,
Anytime.
we're not understanding? Because that may be my.
That's kind of one of my
I don't know
first
about-
questions, is how much do you guys know?
Okay. Once-
Canada doesn't know about water.
yeah, we
Yeah.
Roger.
Okay, well, just introduction.
Yeah,
Steve
it's
Kastner.
not Harold,
I
it's called
live in
Cornwall.
Pueblo for
Yeah,
25
but
years or
he's,
so. I worked for the
from
state, the
town.
Division of Water Resources,
the
most of that
county
time out of the office in Pueblo, which does the Arkansas Basin. From 1990
And it's
to,
required.
I don't
So
know, maybe
you're-
like
after 6
2005 or
months,
something
you
like
can
that. I
go
supervised the water commissioner that was here in Custer County, Water District 13.
Contributes
It was Charlie Judge and Steve Drexel,
Okay.
now Jerry.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
And so that was part of my job, also, main part of my job for half that time
yes.
in Pueblo was to do the water court end of the, our office's work down there. That would be, by law, that office has to evaluate water court applications and kind of be the eyes and ears of the court. And that's what took up most of my time. And you get to know, the water rights pretty well and areas. And I also supervise pretty much everything west of Pueblo, like Fremont, the Chaffee, the Lake counties.
In
So,
District 13.
that was District 12, 11.
Okay,
and
so you
13.
did cross district.
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
whole basin, basically.
Yeah, everything west and even south of Pueblo. For a while I did everything, but then it got reduced to like these counties, Warfano, kind of stopped at Warfano.
Got it.
And I retired from the state in 2013, and not really having much of a plan. I got sucked back into water rights consulting. So now I do that for small ditch companies, individuals. I also manage the Purgatory River Water Conservancy District in Trinidad. That's a federal dam reservoir project, irrigation project. So I do that kind of half-time. And the other half-time is other clients.
Are you an attorney?
Engineer.
Engineer? Okay.
So no need to insult me.
No?
No, but there's a certain set of water attorneys in the state, and a certain set of water engineers, and they work.
Chad, if you can't hear, you're welcome to come close. You are too, of course.
Yeah, you slide up there. Chad Livingston, a ranch owner out in the East Hills.
Yep. What was your, I couldn't hear.
Steve
Steve
Kastner.
Kastner.
Kastner, okay, thank you. Nice to meet you.
And then your mother,
Victoria.
Victoria, my father is Lawrence Livingston.
Yeah.
Lawrence Livingston.
and a little Livingston project.
You
Yeah, a
got
little
history with
street and all
that.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, I'd say in the water engineers and water attorneys, they kind of all know each other after a while in this business. So I am an engineer, but I do work closely with a lot of attorneys. Turning on to water rights, I guess I'm not too sure where you guys want to start. This valley up here is not much different than anywhere else that's in the mountains. Lots of small ditches. This valley has a lot of tributary streams. You know, that comes into play with some of this upper arch stuff. We can talk about that a little later, but
What constitutes a ditch? Does it have to have a water right on it?
no, you can go dig a ditch today, you just can't divert any water. You could build a dam today, you just can't store any water until you get a water right or some other
A
means.
file for it.
Yeah, some other means of doing
Adjudicate.
it. Yeah. The way it all started was, people came up here in 1869. They started digging ditches, and there was a whole mess of them. This area is pretty dense, ditches and water rights. But you get to about the 1880s, you start to run out of enough water for all these ditches, and so you have a supply in the creek, comes from a lot of the snow melt, and you have a demand of these water rights, and pretty soon, you had more demand, and you have people fighting, and so they said we need a system to deal with this. So they kind of copied the mining system where you're the first guy there, you get to stake it out, and that's that. And so
First in right, first in use.
yeah, so in 1893 up here, they had their first adjudication of water rights. Court decreed water rights, and they sent out notices before that, and they had a position called the referee. They still do today at the water court. Every county, not every county, but every district court jurisdiction did this about these times, 1890s, 1910, that was the period. And so the referee would send out a notice saying, if you got a claim, come to court, and they basically interviewed the person, the family.
Prove you were there first or something.
Yeah, and the testimony for here is still in the Fremont District Court. It's down in Canyon City. You can see the referee testimonies still today, the transcripts. And they would kind of do a stream. They would ask your neighbor above you and the neighbor below you, is what this guy telling us right? Did he do 20 acres, and when did he dig the ditch in spring of 1870? And
And he put a hand dug well in there.
yeah. Back then, they could only adjudicate irrigation rights. You could do a storage right or a direct flow right, like a ditch, but it was pretty much just limited irrigation. It really wasn't until the turn of the century where they said, we need some other things. So then you started seeing domestic rights. Back then, municipal was called domestic. City of Colorado Springs would file for a ditch, and they'd say for domestic purposes. Today,
Domestic versus ag, that was really
yeah, something different. Today, you would call that municipal. If you had your own well or something, that's domestic. So anyway, they did that, and in particular in District 13, they had an adjudication in 1893, and more people came in, and they did 1894, a few more rights, 1895 and 1896, and finally they said, okay, that's it. We're going to take these 4 years of claims, we're going to make one decree out of it, and they did. And that's your original or your first adjudication of water rights. So 1896 is the adjudication date, and the other date is your appropriation date, often called the priority date.
Prior
That's
to
your-
the adjudication.
Yeah,
Before the
they're all
adjudication.
prior
Right.
to the adjudication. So you got 1896, and then 1896 or earlier
Right.
claims, priority dates or appropriation dates.
Right.
And then maybe somebody doesn't come in to that session, they dug their ditch in 1880, or maybe they dig a new ditch in 1898 after that. So you hold another adjudication, maybe 5, 10, 20 years later, when you get enough claims. And everything in that second adjudication is junior to everything in the first, even if it has an earlier appropriation date. You can't go back and
It was adjudicated
proceed a
or after
prior
the fact.
adjudication,
Got it.
yeah.
Interesting,
So-
I didn't know that.
So that's, when you sort water rights by a priority, the first thing you sort is the adjudication. Then you go within that. Yeah, so that's it. And that's what you have here, and there really hasn't been a lot of, there really hasn't been a, we call the later adjudication supplementary.
Later than what, the second?
Later than the original. And anything other than the original is called the supplementary. They come after and they come in order. There's been little decrees up here, but by 1896, it was pretty much done. Other places like on the flats and the plains out east, they have big canals, and those big canals kind of took a while. They needed enough people to get enough economics to build a ditch that size, 100 miles long and 40 feet wide. And so some of those big water rights came later, like the 1890s and stuff, and they had a few more adjudications that came along. But up here, 1896, you were pretty much done, and they were pretty much all your quote irrigation rights. And up here, you just have the two towns. Other than irrigation, the water use, you just have the two towns. One water supplier. You know, there is, as far as I'm aware, there is no old municipal or domestic rights for these two towns. They pretty much had some wells until the 1970s. Wells just weren't even administered. And then they brought them in and said, okay, you guys are pretty junior in priority. You just got these 1960s, 50s, 40s wells. You need to do something about that.
Yeah, so it was using the mine shaft.
Yeah.
A lot of years.
Yeah. So until 1972, they kind of just ignored wells. Then they decided, well, they really are connected to the rest of the water world. Especially, you know, it kind of came in after World War II. They started drilling bigger wells, and they got electricity out there, these rural areas where they could pump 2, 3, 4 CFS of water, you know, and maybe they're 200 feet from the river or some stream, and these guys with 100-year-old water rights are getting called out by ditches, and your neighbor's pumping away merrily without a water right. So they figured we better do something. So you don't have a lot of well stuff up here, you know, Round Mountain, and a few other entities are about it for wells. Just to finish that thought, Round Mountain, they did change some water rights on Macy Creek. Changed them from irrigation use. You have to go back and get those rights if you want a senior right, because that's what all the senior rights are. They're irrigation rights, especially up here. And so they changed some of them from that use to municipal use or augmentation. Then they dried up a farm, a ranch.
The Johnson.
What year was that? Did they just do that recently then?
15 years ago.
15 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was there something that was just done recently by Round Mountain Water, selling some water down to Pueblo or something, excess?
No, not that I'm aware of.
I don't know.
Okay, that's cool.
They may lease some excess water to race or something.
So the Johnson Ranch water was off of Macy Creek.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there was 3 or 4 ditches. I think they dried up 3 of them right away, and then the lane is something they're trying to do now. But they dried it up, and when you dry up a change of water like that, and you dry up the farm ground, a lot of the water was historic return flows. You irrigate your field, it ran back to the creek.
Yeah.
You don't get that in a change case.
Right. Just
You only get
consumptive.
the part the plants used, the consumptive use. So then that occurs historically May, June, July, maybe August up here, and you can take that consumptive use water as still measured at the original points. We call them like augmentation stations. You still call the water down to your diversion point, the old ditch diversion point, and you put it back in the creek and you run it down to maybe adjacent to where your well is pumping next to Grape Creek. And it replaces those depletions that well is sucking out of Grape Creek. Or if you don't need it that day, you run it down to Deweese, where you've leased or bought some storage space from the Deweese Ditch Company, and you store it there until you need it.
Can we just freeze frame there? Let's assume that that's happening, but Deweese is full.
Well, Round Mountain has some space, either leased or owned, I don't know.
In Deweese?
Yeah,
they own.
and they would, any municipality would want that space to be firm, to where it can't be spilled. And so they don't want Deweese to storage rights come in priority, push their municipal water out.
So if they
there's
had-
probably some firmness to that.
Once their
space.
rights full down there, they don't care if it's spilled or not, right? Because they have their rights full. Round Mountain's right. would
Yeah,
be
they have
full
their
of
little,
Deweese.
they have their little pool of consumable water
Right.
stored there, and presumably it can't be spilled.
So
by
the
Deweese.
assumption is, if there's water running over the dam at Deweese, all of those storage rights have been satisfied. That would be the assumption.
There's 3 storage rights in Deweese, plus these contract rights. Other people have contracted for space, like BLM has, Upper Ark has, Round Mountain has. You know, Deweese is selling them a little space. They've enlarged or raised that spillway on that dam a few times, and that gives them a little more space, and they lease out that space for some money. And so they get a little something out of it, and the other entities get some firm reservoir storage space. So that's kind of the valley in a nutshell. You know, up here things have not changed a whole lot. You don't have you have the H2O. You know, that's your first dip into the real world out there. When you get down to Pueblo and Coral Springs and Aurora, all in Arkansas, and those Security and Fountain and Whitefields, all those cities, they're all in places that don't have a lot of water. So they're looking, based on river calls, they're looking for water rights of 1874 or earlier west of Pueblo. Because they can change those, and they can run them downstream, like the H2O, they can store them in Pueblo, they can exchange them up to Twin Lakes, they can put them in the Coral Springs pipeline up to Security, Whitefield, Coral Springs.
How can they change them? You said 1874 and earlier?
Yeah, they like that because it's typically sufficient seniority priority date to where even in a moderate drought, they're not called out priority.
I see, okay.
Yeah. If you're gonna buy a water right, you wanna buy the senior one.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Well, can we talk about H2O a little bit?
Mhm.
You hear a lot of stuff. I've never read any of the legals on that whole transaction, but obviously Whitefield Fountain bought some of that water. Court says you have to dry up this land and send that water to Pueblo Reservoir.
Yeah, so I think it was Fountain. Fountain bought the water rights from the ranch owner. Okay, so now they have these irrigation rights decreed to be used
On
on
that
that land.
Yeah.
And they say, well, we want to use them in Fountain.
Right.
So the
Change
first
in
thing,
use, huh?
you go to court, you file a change in use from irrigation to municipal. You'd file a change in place of use from H2O to Fountain, and whatever else you might want to file. And so what they do is what typically happens is they have engineers and they'll go out there and they'll dig a bunch of 8-foot holes in the ground, piezometers, and then they'll shut off the water to that ranch. They'll stop using it and they'll see how much it dries up. And you may have areas that turn brown, you may have areas that stay green, and you read those piezometer wells, and For anything of a groundwater depth less than 8 feet, closer to the surface, that's within range of your grass hay up here. And so, say a quarter of that ranch, you looked at the piezometers there, and they were about, the water level stayed about 4 feet deep, even though you're not irrigating anymore. We would call that sub-irrigation. Those plants are deriving the water they need, or at least some of it, from a naturally occurring water source. And so you would, when you get the change case, you don't get the full consumptive use of that grass hay. You get something closer to half, because half came from irrigation and half came from naturally occurring groundwater. Or maybe your neighbors are irrigating up there, and that's what's doing it. But
So, can I ask, I'm a little confused. So the water's going into the H2O ranch, or any ranch, and you said they shut it off and they let it dry into sea. How do you shut off water going to a ranch?
well, you just don't use the ditches.
The irrigation,
Divert
just
the
let it go
ditch.
on down.
Got it.
Or let it run through.
So you don't flood irrigate that
Yeah,
property.
you want to dry it out and see how dry it will get. A lot of times, the purchase price of a property is based on how well it's going to dry up. It wasn't the case in Fountains. They, as far as I remember, they bought it for X number of dollars, and that was that. A lot of times, though, like I say, if your ranch only half dries up, you only get
Right.
half the price or some other number.
Exactly. What time of year do they do that test?
Well,
Or is it a specific month they have to do it in, or do it a
no,
few times
they'll do
now?
it for 2 or 3 years.
Oh, in a row?
During the growing
Yeah.
season.
Yeah.
And not get to irrigate at all
No.
during those? That's a price tag to pay right there.
Yeah. I mean, you're gonna dry it out, and you're gonna have maybe a wet year, a normal year, a drier year. You're gonna see what happens in the groundwater level. No, sometimes you don't have to do that ahead of time, getting your decree. You can write those conditions into a decree, where you can say, Fountain, maybe they don't need this water for 20 years, let's say. They say, we want our change decree now, because it's only gonna get harder.
Right.
And 20 years from now, when we go to dry it up, that's when we'll have those piezometer wells in, and we'll get the credit we get from drying it up. There's kind of a curve that says, if groundwater's this deep, you get this percent of credit of the irrigation demand in that crop. So that's what went on there.
Do they take into account injury to downgrade, not downstream, but just a ranch right across the road from H2O? Severely impacted that. I'm assuming that was all taken into account.
Only to the extent of that ranch's water rights.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. If that ranch is downstream and they historically benefited by the return flows off the H2O, they're entitled under law to the continuation of those return flows. And so if H2O diverted, irrigated their ranch, and a lot of those return flows went back to the creek, and right down below is the next guy's head gate, he's entitled to the continuation of those return flows. They can't
His
make them up
right
at
was based
Pueblo.
on that.
Yeah,
His initial right.
especially if he's junior. You're entitled to the conditions on the stream that existed at the time of your appropriation. So if H2O is 1870 water right, and this guy dug his ditch in 1880, his source of supply a lot of times was those return flows off the H2O. So just because Fountain changes it, moves it to Fountain, he's still entitled to those
Okay,
return
because
flows.
that injury just wouldn't be
Yeah.
accepted. By return flows, you talking about sub or surface, or both? Tailwater, we know it as tailwater here.
Yeah. In a decree, you're going to see a mention of both typically.
Okay.
Some of the irrigated water runs off the surface of the land right back to the creek. I mean, you irrigate on Tuesday, is back to the creek on Wednesday. Some, not consumed by the plant, goes into the ground and seeps back to the creek. That may take months. It depends. You may have a ditch right next to the stream. Maybe it all occurs within the same month. Or you may have a field 5 miles from a stream, and it takes a lot longer.
Is it a set percentage in your math formula that you use then to figure it? Like
There's-
this much for seepage, this much for...
Yeah, there's some ranges. Usually overall return flows are 50, 40, 60%, depends on the irrigation method.
Okay, all right,
If you put in a center pivot sprinkler, you only have 15% return flows.
right, okay.
If you just
Evaporation.
sloppily flood irrigate,
Yep.
you might have 60% return flows.
Right.
And then of that 60%, they're usually split about half. That half goes right back on the surface. The other half is what we call lagged or delayed return flows, and they seep back over time. And you can model that. And so of that half of the 60, that 30%, you can say 10% gets back in month 1, 20%
I
month
see.
2, and the fountain in our example owes that timing back too. And those subsurface return flows may come back to a point below this guy's head gate that's down the stream. They may come back, especially up here where you can kind of go from one stream to the next, not too hard. They may creep back, at some point lower than him, and they do that on that lag schedule, and the fountain is obligated to maintain those, and that's in their decree. They can make up the lag return flows that occur in the winter by replacement at Deweese, because Deweese is the calling right in the winter. They're storing on great, people aren't irrigating. But in the summer, if there's some intervening ditches that historically got those lag return flows, once again, they're entitled to them, and at the same amount and timing. And so Fountain has to have a source of replacement during the irrigation season to maintain those. And typically you just allocate some of the water at your old ditch head gate for that purpose. That's some of your, if you have a 2-foot water right, 1 foot might be consumptive use, the other foot might be return flows, and that other foot gets split up, and the decrees define all those actions.
Like, I'm just wondering, just quick, I don't mean to take time, but like, does that change then depending on how high your, say, water table is or at your ranch, or, like at my ranch, I've got a big aquifer underneath so the water table's pretty high, so does that come into your formula at figuring out how much water?
And it can affect the timing,
Okay.
but that's all kind of part of the engineering
Okay,
change.
yeah, I understand.
Lag depletion on a domestic well, is that taken into account when the state permits a well or no?
Those are permitted typically as an exempt well. They're exempt from the priority administration, and so
And the philosophy?
there's nothing taken into them. They're limited by statute of what you can get, 15 gallons a minute.
Use your
Yeah.
use.
But you can, there's no obligation to augment or replace an exempt well. Municipal wells, irrigation wells, what they call non-exempt wells, that's where you need plans for augmentation, like Round Mountain.
Okay.
But little exempt wells, they have a special place in statute.
Okay, let me follow up on that then, because we're kind of jumping ahead to the whole augmentation plan here, but if this augmentation plan goes through, is it true then that they could augment individual domestic wells on less than 35 acres?
Yes.
Okay,
I can better answer that question when we talk about a perk.
okay. But in the big scheme of things, it wasn't really designed towards domestic wells. It was to augment commercial and ag use, or no?
What?
Augmentation.
Nothing particular.
Okay,
Yeah.
could be whatever.
Yeah, it could be whatever.
Okay.
You can augment a ditch, you can augment a well. It's just, an augmentation plan is not a water right, it's simply a court-approved plan. And it involves water
To
rights.
use the water rights.
Yeah, it involves water rights that are used. It often involves exchanges where you want to try to move water upstream. But, you can augment a golf course using a ditch by releases from a reservoir in some other stream. So you're diverting your ditch out of priority, maybe without any water right, and you're replacing back to the river or some release from some reservoir, and so the next ditch down doesn't know the difference. And that's an aug plan. If you didn't make that reservoir release, that ditch downstream would know the difference. But if you can make it up somewhere ahead of the next guy down, you're okay. He can't
Doesn't know the
complain,
difference.
he's not being heard. Sometimes he doesn't like the quality of the water, or the temperature, or the sediments, or things like that, but,
So,
It's good to know, thanks.
two questions, in priority and out of priority. Are we really talking about utilizing your water based on what your adjudicated water rights says you can use it?
without any, day in, day out, Jerry goes up and down the west side of this valley, and the ditches he allows to divert are in priority.
Meaning within their right?
Within their right and within the current supply that the stream is providing.
Okay,
There may be only enough stream water for the first 2 water rights
Right.
on some day.
so you could have a senior water right, but you still be out of priority.
Yeah, it's not senior enough then.
Not senior enough, that's exactly right.
And these streams, these streams will dry up in a drought. So you may have the best water right, but there's no water in the stream.
That happened to us last year, not a stick of grass grew.
Yeah.
Yeah, or Horn Creek. Horn Creek, it comes down in the spring and it goes back up sometime later in the summer.
And so do the wells.
Yeah, yeah. And so, you're still subject to God.
So exchange of water. There are people who say that's nothing but a paper chase. If we want to exchange water to Twin Lakes, or from Twin Lakes to here, they could release water out of Twin Lakes, they being Upper Ark or whoever, send it downstream and get credit for it up here.
They would release it from Twin Lakes. It would flow all the way down to the mouth of Great Creek, Canyon City. So far, no exchange. That's just a reservoir release.
So below Great Creek, nobody knows the difference.
Yeah, if you do it right. So you release your water out of Twin Lakes. It gets to the mouth of Great Creek. And if the conditions were such that everybody who's entitled to be in priority on Great Creek that day are satisfied, and other water from Great Creek is being called down to other calls on the Arkansas, you can, for instance, store some water in Deweese out of priority. Nobody in between is hurt, which I think the nobody is just Deweese Ditch Company. So if they're not sweeping the creek, you store it out of priority in Deweese. Eventually, you put a dent in the flows of the Arkansas. Say 1 CFS is less than should be there, and that 1 CFS you got coming out of Twin Lakes makes it up. So the guys down at Pueblo or East don't know the difference.
That means you can upstream of Deweese, you can continue to use water, but you would have had to let go into it.
Yeah. So
Without
that's
that release from Twin Lakes.
Yeah.
You could have not had water to irrigate with.
yeah. It's a means of moving water. Or you don't really move it. You
Right.
just keep it in somewhere
You
where
don't
it's
have to let it
passing
go.
by.
That's right.
You store it or divert it out of priority, and you replace it down below. That's an exchange. Upper Ark filed for 2 in this case, from the mouth of Grape to Deweese, and from Deweese to Conquistador, Katzenstein. 2 exchanges.
And those exchanges can only be done, I'm asking,
The one we just
from
described.
September to May?
Water right wise, you can do it 12 months a year. Practically, and the one we're describing
Right.
on Grape Creek, if Deweese's die is sweeping the creek at their head gate by Canyon, you can't exchange. Because if you stored anything in Deweese Reservoir, you would be shorting them. They're already not having
Right.
enough.
They're
And
sweeping
you would
it,
make
so-
them have less than enough, more or less. The other example is if, like in the winter, Deweese Dye shuts the gates at Deweese Reservoir, and they take all the inflow available and store it under their 3 water rights. And so your exchange gets a priority. Like in their Upper Ark's application, there's like a 2015 priority date claim. Exchanges get a priority, but they're kind of separate priorities from normal storage or direct flow priorities. So, if there's plenty of water in Grape Creek and the call on La Junta was 1884, you have a 2015 exchange, you could operate that exchange. That guy in 1884 La Junta, he's not gonna know the difference. You know, the ones that know the difference are the intervening water rights. From the mouth of Grape Creek to Dewey's Reservoir, they call them the lower and the upper terminus of your exchange. The other thing that gets in the way of new exchanges are in-stream flow water rights. The state Colorado Water Conservation Board files for in-stream flow water rights for preserving the natural environment. There's dozens of them along your creeks here, and they usually limit themselves to the Forest Service boundary or above. But sometimes, if there's a special need, like maybe the brown trout fishery on Grape Creek, and they'll say, you know, we need it's on the edge already, Dewey clamps down the flows in the winter, but let's file one of these in-stream flow rights and we'll get ahead of any new exchanges. And so then Upper Ark comes along and says, we want to exchange, maybe there's 3 feet in Grape Creek, and the CWCB says, can't drop it below 3 feet, that's our fish water.
Piscatorial use.
Yeah. And so intervening water rights and in-stream flow water rights.
What about like,
affect new
the
exchanges.
effect any changes, like, I know creeks around here, you know, that, what about like a Utah call or something like that, where it's set up that way, where that there's, you know, you see those creeks where it goes under underground for 5-6 miles and there's nothing there, but yet they still have a right to it. You know what I mean? You know what I'm talking about, the
Administratively,
Utah call concept.
yeah, administratively, the division engineer is not allowed exchanges on feudal or intermittent. Feudal calls are intermittent streams.
Okay.
The reason is, say you had a reservoir up on Horn Creek or Antelope Creek, and the creek goes dry below some point below your reservoir, and then it pops up again, and you want to exchange water all the way from the Arkansas to Antelope Creek. There's a dry reach in there, so if you store out a priority in that reservoir in Antelope Creek, you're creating a situation where the effect is not instantaneous on that intermittent stream. It'll lag out, just like those lag return flows. There's an underground component. And
No,
so
I'm
you're-
not talking about that reservoir I got, I'm talking about the actual
That's just
just
an example.
irrigating.
Well, you can irrigate with under a feudal call. If the water commissioner says, yeah, the stream's dry below, you go ahead and take it. You're technically out of priority, but it's a lawful diversion.
Okay.
Diversion under a feudal
Were
call.
you, Steve, were you one of the engineers that came out to my ranch in 2005 and did all the studies at the pond? I guess
Possibly.
not, maybe not.
Possibly, I don't remember.
Oh, yeah, that's no worries. Sorry to interrupt, go ahead. Thanks for answering my question, though.
So why would a farmer or landowner want to divert their water? Why would they want to exchange it? What's the motivation?
Just to get it to a place where you can use it. Like these 2 exchanges Upper Ark has filed. They have water on the Arkansas, Twin Lakes, and other places around Salida. And if they have a need or a demand here in Custer County, that exchange is a method of getting that water up here. You don't physically get
Yeah,
Arkansas
it's
water
a
up here. You
swap
get your own, you're
Of
swapping
inventory.
available water up here
You're getting to
for
keep
somebody, yeah.
and use it.
And so Upper Ark, maybe maybe this augmentation plan takes off and they have a bunch of demands here of their customers or their members, and they need water in that conquistador reservoir. That's why they would do it. A farmer, you don't see a lot of augmentation for farming. It's golf courses, it's commercial development, RV parks, things like that.
That's up till now.
It's not-
but
it's
there-
not
There
ag so
can
much.
be ag
There can be.
because the way we're augmented now.
Yeah, marijuana, something that
Uh,
grows in a building.
Or even a rancher has a water right, and some of it, because of the way it was augmented, they had thought that wasn't gonna be used, but yet he had enough water, he is using it to irrigate some things. He may need to augment that if the demand was there to open up that new piece of ground that he wants.
Yeah. In today's world on the Arkansas, you can't afford in ag prices to buy augmentation water.
Right. Which, that's where I was gonna go next, if we can.
Yeah.
And it starts dabbling in this Upper Ark thing.
And it may be a good time to start talking about that.
So Upper Ark in their app has priced that water at $8,000 a tenth of an acre foot. So my question is this, is that if that plan is allowed by the courts for our area, would it be safe to say then that that's probably gonna set the market price for water?
It will. For other augmentation people. Say you had a ranch and you wanted to dry up one of your senior ditches and get in the augmentation business. There's one price in the market already, and you may want to undercut them, you may, I don't know. The price of water is very locally dictated though. You know, if I want to put an RV park in at Horn Creek, and there's only one water right that gets water dependably, that's the water right I have to buy, or a part of it. And the price of that is what that guy wants to sell it for. You go to the Arkansas, there's a lot more suppliers, a lot more connectivity of the water. It's more of a market.
Or if a rancher way up here has got canyons and he could put a dam in and store the water and then wait for opportunities to sell it. He could do that, and then he could set the price depending on how dry it is below him, who wants to augment water into some field in the valley.
It's like having a silo on your
Are there certain
corn
rules
farm.
though that, like for ranchers storing water just temporarily, like, you know, like you can only store it 72 hours off an irrigation ditch or something like that?
Yeah, that's an administrative rule for head stabilization. If you have a half a CFS ditch and that rate of flow isn't sufficient to push itself across your field or to the bottom of your field, they let you put in a small pond, you fill it up for 72 hours and push.
Yeah.
And
Well, for point of clarification now, if I have an ag water right tied to my land, that doesn't mean I can build a pond and store that water.
that water right's decreed
For irrigation
of a specific parcel, typically, the decrees up here describe the parcels, not all decrees do. You have a point of diversion described, you have a use, you have a flow rate or a volume, you have a location, those are all parameters in your decree. And you can't change any of those without going to court.
Right, but you can go build a pond, and you can go get it adjudicated.
You could go build a
court,
pond,
and
you
get
could
them to
lease,
consider all the implications.
you could build a pond, you could change your water right to store in a pond. Or you could go lease some water from Upper Ark.
But not all that going to court, correct?
You could do that without going to court. You could lease water and exchange it without going to
Or
court.
buy the augmentation.
You could, yeah. If you wanted to change your own water right to storage, you'd have to go to court. Just, I mean, that's what they're doing now.
Right. If I or anybody else walked up to you and said, what's the price of water worth in Custer County? What would you answer them? If they were asking in all honesty and didn't think it was a loaded question.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I'm gonna do is look at how good a water right do you want? You want one of the 1869 water rights, the best water rights up here? Or do you want an 1890 right that's not probably worth more than the paper it's printed on?
Well, maybe another way to look at the question you just asked is how capitalism, competition drives price. Upper Ark, and there's other districts, you don't have to augment the water from Upper Ark, you can buy it. Or you gotta compete for that.
Yeah.
And so that would help adjust what Upper Ark would want to charge for it, or another district to augment water. Right? I mean, there's ways that the market can control it.
Yeah.
But you are limited by how far away that can occur.
Yeah. And I've seen, over my time, I've seen the price change greatly. You know, back in 1990, things were being sold on an ag basis. You know, you could buy farmland east of Pueblo based on revenues you expect off of farming. You can't do that anymore. And now, if you want to buy a farm, you got to pay prices greater for the water
Plus the water.
than you will ever yield revenue-wise unless you're growing marijuana or something. It's funny.
And what drives that? That's
Demand.
That's the
Future
other thing.
development.
And not demand from agriculture, is it?
No, it's population.
Yeah, it's future development.
It's
Population growth in
growth of
Colorado.
urban areas.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really what it says it, because they'll pay a higher price.
Yeah.
See that cost up in
Buttons to
Alaska.
Yeah. The, the market on I saw an interesting graph the other day. Colorado Big Thompson project. It's a federal diversion project from the upper Colorado River over to the east slope, Estes Park, Fort Collins area. Built in the 1930s, and you can buy shares in that, and you always could, and it was mostly farmers originally. It was supplemental water for farming on the South Platte. And I don't know what those, they call them units, not shares, but I don't know what those units originally cost, but around 2010, a unit of that, which is kind of like an acre foot of water, and it's consumable because it comes from the west slope, so you can consume it on the east slope. There's no return flow obligation to that. But around 2010, that was $12,000 for a unit. It's more than you could probably pay in farm and try to ever get that back, but if you're a municipality, you can get that back. Today, municipalities are requiring that developers, if they want to annex to the city and do a subdivision, that they bring water and water rights with them, because you're putting a greater demand on that existing municipal supply. And the units now are like 38,000 in 9 years. The market on Fountain Creek has been there's a certain ditch there that gets changed over Southside Colorado Springs, $12,000 for 7/10 of an acre foot of consumable water. You have to go through court with it. It's not hard though, everybody's already done it. Upper Ark, in that area, the cost of a Twin Lake share has always set the price. Those Twin Lake shares, the water comes mostly from the west slope through a tunnel up there by Aspen. And there's about 50,000 shares. They were all ag water for Ordway and Crowley County, which all got dried up. It got dried up because the cities bought that Colorado Canal water rights, and they bought those Twin Lake shares.
So that's what drives the price of the water, and a guy up here could be offered that price to unload his family ranch's right, and wanting to retire, there's nothing to stop him from doing that.
No.
Unless somebody with bigger pockets buys it to try to keep it in here,
Mhm.
right? I mean,
It could
what's the
happen.
other choice?
Though just to finish a little, that Twin Lakes shares in the 80s, those cities paid about $3,000 a share. By 2000, what shares remained were about $15,000. They're now about $45,000. And in 1992, when Upper Ark got their first decree, they had about 20 of those shares, and they based their 1/10 of an acre foot consumption price that you just mentioned on the price of Twin Lakes water at that time. And if you go over to Salida and you join the plan over there with them, last I heard it was like $3,800 for the 1/10 of an acre foot. They're a little lower than the Twin Lakes number is now, but that's their benchmark, or at least it was over there. I don't know why it's so much more expensive here. It's probably what they paid for that conquistador water.
So, I'm assuming a private individual can do a water augmentation plan if they're willing to spend the time and the money. Without this augmentation plan that Upper Ark's proposing, can there be augmentation plans? I mean, we've got 8 up here in the county, is my understanding. I'm guessing there's not going to be another 30 or 40 augmentation plans to augment a private well on less than 35 acres. Because it hasn't been done historically, right? Senate Bill 35 has nobody's gone out and said, I'm going to go buy water from somewhere to augment my own well. so I can do a well on less than 35 acres. That law is pretty well held its purpose, correct? If I owned 5 acres and wanted to go to court and spend the time and money, it's possible that I could augment my own well if I could find somebody to buy the water from.
And that's, up here, you're kind of starting from scratch, but if you go over to Buena Vista and you look at those RV courts between Salida and Leadville, a lot of them have little Twin Lakes aug plan. You could buy a share of Twin Lakes for $10,000 back then. You could get a little 3-page decreed aug plan and you're good. It wasn't a big deal. If you want to put a trailer park 3 miles south of town here along Grape Creek,
Custer County Commissioners.
where are you going to go for aug water? You have to start from scratch. You have to go buy
Yes.
part of somebody's
Right.
water right, somebody ditch, go change that.
Right.
You're probably going to need some little storage vessel to handle the timing issues and the return flow issues. So,
So it's awful hard for a private guy to do that.
starting from scratch.
Right.
If you're over on the Arkansas, not as hard.
Right.
It's probably a good time to talk about Upper Ark, because I think we're about there. So, and I remember this
Is that-
sadly.
Is that the road, that-
We were having a lot of
City?
issues with people
It's in the county,
in
okay.
Chaffee County, Fremont County,
I guess.
a little less up
I think
here,
the first thing we
and
have
people
to do
would
is talk
want a
to
pond.
the bridge supervisor
They
and
would
see-
build a pond in some little
'cause I
stream
think
over
Judy said they do
Buena
not
Vista or
have
something.
funds for that road. It's not a
And
road.
some ditch owner right below would say, hey, that evaporation and seepage and storage is all hurting, affecting my senior water right. Make them tear that pond out. Or there's a lot of subdivisions over there where they had early aug plans from the 70s or 80s, and the developer only had enough water, so when you bought a lot there, you could drill your own well, but it was only an in-house use only well. Maybe it was a 2-acre lot, and you're one of many over there. But the next thing you see is they want a little patch of green, or they want a horse. And, the aug plan decree doesn't allow for that, it only allowed for the in-house use, because that's the amount of water dedicated to that plant for augmentation. So it was more and more people are coming up, and you get more and more of these subdivisions, more and more of these ponds, and, it was just an administrative hassle. And so Upper Ark, they're up there collecting tax money.
Because I think you need.
I never really knew what their mission was, but they decided they were gonna come up
Do you have their
with a
phone
plan.
number?
And if, this is their first decree, 1992 application. And it
Yeah.
said they were gonna augment on-stream ponds and wells. It was specifically for those two purposes. Well, as the case went on, you started to see the RV stuff and commercial, and then a general, so they could basically augment anything. But that was the impetus.
Okay, sounds great.
And they
Thanks.
they had a limited portfolio of water rights they could use for augmentation. Some Twin Lake shares, a few other little rights here and there, and a few storage vessels. And they did the exact same thing. This new application is not much unlike the original one from 20-some years ago. They said, okay, from Twin Lakes, we can release water and we can augment anybody along the river, and we can go up any tributary until we hit the first ditch head gate. And so that was their blue line. You can see it today.
Can I ask a pointed question about that? So up any tributary until they hit a head gate, meaning that from that head gate below, they're not gonna injure anybody,
Yeah,
correct?
there's no water right till you get to the Arkansas
Okay.
River, and they can replace to the Arkansas River. They had some rights up on the South Arkansas by Monarch ski area, a little below there, the North Fork Reservoir, so they could augment on North Fork Creek and the South Arkansas, through Poncha Springs and Salida. They could do that. That was an area. And they went all the way down to Parkdale, mostly along the river. In some areas, like between creeks, they would draw a blue line that went up. And And everybody thought all that was sort of okay, but back to the question about convenience of availability of augmentation water, developers said, hey, I can just go to Upper Ark, write a check, poof, I have augmentation water. I can go to the county commissioners in Chaffey County and get my subdivision approved. And these 5 acre, 3 acre, whatever lot sizes they're allowed, each could have their own well. And depending how much money they give Upper Ark, they could have a lawn, they could have 1.5 horses,
State water,
whatever they designed in that aug plan. But it made augmentation water easily available. And so all of a sudden, poof, here's a subdivision, poof, here's a subdivision. You know, and that's kind of where now things dump onto the county commissioner's lap.
Exactly.
Who's the one who enforces like the
Water commissioners.
for like, and I'm saying like somebody who owns 5 acres, if maybe they're only allowed to have 2 horses, and they're over there with 2 people living in a motor home, 8 horses, they're boarding commercially without a special use permit. Oh, you know what I mean? Who is the one?
All those aug plan decrees are supposed to have accounting that goes along with them, that's submitted monthly or annually to the division engineer. And you're allowed 40 homes, 2 horses per lot, 100 square feet of lawn. You know, the decrees describe all that.
Right.
And
that's on Jerry.
that's
So
on
that's on
Jerry. And somebody at the subdivision, this is the problem, somebody at the subdivision has to kind of be in charge of that. Well, the
Yeah.
developers do it, then they leave, and then
Right.
you got a bunch of homeowners say, what?
Well,
That's an aug plan.
Everybody in Antelope Valley looks to me, I'm the only ranch there, and what do I gotta do, take pictures of the violations
No,
and send them to Jerry? Or
Yeah, well, yeah, you can.
Just kinda start that way? I don't mean to be a
Yeah.
tattletale, but I've honestly seen over the last 8 years, probably 6 springs that have dried up. You know, and I think a lot of that's from,
Yeah, but that's how,
Stealing water.
there's accounting requirements to answer your question.
okay.
Jackie, could you drop that boring,
So, and maybe you don't want to answer this, that's fine, because I understand you don't want to get into the plan that but what is the purpose of like up to Arkansas? Why would they want to change an aug plan? Why these boundaries are they trying to change, and what is the purpose of that?
Well, as I just described, early on, their purpose was to allow people to have a small pond, or allow people to have a lawn where they otherwise couldn't. Or if they wouldn't, tried to do it on their own, they couldn't afford
But
it.
how does changing the boundaries do that? I'm not wrapping my brain around this.
Well, there's certain, that blue line is an area with which they could legally replace outer priority diversions
Right.
without injury to other water rights.
Right.
And so that's the area within which they're confined. Now that blue line, it's red up there,
Right.
if they bought a water right at the head of Grape Creek and built a small reservoir, they could extend their blue line all the way up Grape Creek. That's where all these tributaries kind of come into play. It's easier to augment all the way down the Arkansas than it is up here because you have a bunch of little tributaries. They can't go up a tributary very far here without hitting a head gate.
Right.
You know, that's why that line stops
where it's at,
south and
really.
west of West
Dictated
Cliff.
by those
It doesn't really go anywhere.
That doesn't mean though that they can't do another one above it.
No, and that's exactly what they've done. After this 1992 application, a couple years later, they obtained some water rights on Cottonwood Creek. It flows in from the west of Buena Vista. So all of a sudden they could, in a reservoir up there, they could augment now on Cottonwood Creek. And so poof, 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 a few more subdivisions. Another place was Centerville, was a little north of Slida. That didn't do much. They also have a kind of a sub-decree, it's mentioned in here, on Cherry Creek, which is like around Howard in Fremont County. They got basically an aug plan up there, but to go above that first head gate, but they didn't have an augmentation source up there, or a reservoir or anything. But they said, we'll go up there, and there's people that want to irrigate or have a pond or something, and we'll augment them. But as soon as that ditch down at the bottom is not satisfied, they have to shut off whatever they're doing, and they can't have any lag depletions in whatever they're doing. So no wells can be augmented, but a pond could. So somebody, if the guy down at the bottom of the creek was satisfied, the member of Upper Ark could divert from the stream, fill his pond, and be happy until this guy wasn't satisfied. Then the member had to shut up his head gate. So they did that. It's sort of augmentation. It's not reliable. You couldn't build a subdivision on that. But they went up another
Hit or
creek
miss,
that way.
some years you'll have
Yeah.
ponds, some years.
Yeah. And if you didn't need it for maybe a few days,